Okay, so good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. This is Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern to figure out the future of smart buildings. Panelists are listed on mondaylive.org, just in case you wonder who we are. Also to note that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. And let's post and have a chit chat on the Zoom chat over the course of this hour, so you can get involved in the conversation. And if you want any of the links that we have on the slide deck, that is also on the homepage of mondaylive.org. If you head over there. So our theme for September is the Great Convergence, and we had a really good conversation last week on the Great Convergence and the sort of the rising concepts, and we're going to continue that conversation this week. And so our agenda is our normal chit chat for a bit, and then talk about Great Convergence. And today we're going to focus on the API. I mean, everybody talks about API, the concept of API first, and people are sort of exploring how to use API. And the question that we're posing for this hour is API the standard for everything? With a question mark at the end, and then hopefully we can have some discussion. So more on that. But before we get into that, Ken, lots of things going on your end.
Yes, Anto, thanks a lot. We've got our new website up. We've been creating it for about the last 3 or 4 months, and we're ready for showtime. I'm sure we've got a few warts and wrinkles, but we're online, and we're starting to start our version of the convergence of the industry, hoping that they'll use automated buildings as a platform. So basically we came on with our September issue in the old format, and a few days ago we dumped the new one on top of it. I'm extremely pleased. The new one is able to sort of lay right on top of the old one, and we can reach back and pull back any of our 23 years of information forward, which I think is quite useful. The new website provides contexted continuous content. We're going to move away from the monthly model, and it's going to be run by our sponsors, contributing editors, and generally anybody in the industry who's interested to participate. And by doing that, we're hoping that we'll get a lot more views, get stuff presented the way folks want it presented. They'll be identified as the purators of their content. So we'll see how that goes. It seems to be starting good. We've had some good feedback that it looks like a direction that's going to work. We thank very much our sponsors, and what we did is we took our traditional banner sponsors from the old website, and we've moved them into gold and platinum sponsors based on how many ads they have, and we're hoping that they'll buy into the dream and stay on as annual sponsors, which we're moving to an annual sponsor model. I think it's important. I think the bottom line there that our goal is to create a self-sustaining resource for the industry, created by the industry, for the industry, for the world to better understand our smarter building value. And I kind of see I'm hoping this will kind of evolve to be a platform that everybody feels comfortable with, and the sponsors will guide it in the direction that it will go. It's kind of interesting because this started way back when I came to the Monday Live group and asked them, what should I do with automated buildings? And they said, well, just turn it over to your people. And I didn't have any people. And when I thought about it, my people are the industry. And so I think that's basically what we've done, is we've reformatted, reinvented it, and turned it over to the industry with the 23 years of stuff underneath it. Hoping it'll all go well. Please feedback your comments and let me know. Back to you, Anto.
Well, your people thank you.
Thank you.
It's a great site. I've been looking at it over the weekend. Hopefully, everybody will participate in this new different adventure for automated buildings. Moving on, John.
Yeah, hi. Some more articles on the mixed messaging coming out of the commercial real estate market and where it's going. Although this week the ones I came across my desk aren't mixed. They're all in the negative direction, if you will. Interesting, majority of corporate users shrinking due to inflation, right? Last year, the story was COVID and the COVID effect. Valuation reset, which of course is going to affect, organizations' ability to fund projects, and pension funds offloading real estate due to, I guess, the jury is out. It has come in on, remote work is here to stay. So, we're tracking this because it obviously affects, I think, everyone on the call here, because changes in the financial outlook will affect how owners and operators make decisions to buy technology to improve their buildings, et cetera. So all of those, I think, if anybody wants to follow the links, they're interesting stories and show, trends that are happening in the real estate market.
So John, that sounds like a lot of doom and gloom right there.
I just report the news. I don't like it.
What was your thoughts on that, on some of these things? Because that's pretty significant, especially the office footprint,
Yeah.
inflation.
I mean, usually when I put up, news items that I get from the various things, there's one on each side. One's going down, the other's going up, right? And, usually we joke about it. This week, all three of them are, saying that there's if you will, a negative impact.
Okay.
I think the most interesting thing that I've heard in the last month or two was from one of our major partners saying that he's seeing a wave of indecision on by owners about investment in upgrading, even for efficiency, even with paybacks, that theoretically are well within the desirable range, right? I think the biggest concern is the indecision that's out there, right, about which direction this is going and how big a problem it's going to be, right? Because I think if people came up with, okay, this is the new normal, the new stability, they can still make financial cases on whether they should improve the buildings. But when people don't know what's going to happen, they hold off, right?
Yeah.
And I'll add that on top of that doom and gloom, I'll add some more to the icing on the cake, that construction costs are going up about 14 to 15%. So another thing to keep a watch on.
So I saw an article a few days ago regarding the open plan, the WeWork, but just basically the open plan office designs is now that companies are wanting their employees to come back. A lot of the employees are pushing back on the idea of a workspace that is wide open, that they can't claim any ownership around, they can't bring any personal effects in, they can't leave their work. And so walls are going back up in a modified fashion, not necessarily the traditional, offices per se, but the idea of reintroducing privacy into the workplace. This was a Wall Street Journal article. So there was, reason to take notice of it. So I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So the workers are finding some leverage to get more comfort in their work.
Yeah, because the rationale behind the article was the workers who had been working at home love the privacy that they have. They love the fact that they have control over their environment, and so why should they leave that to come into an office where they have to give up all their their privacy and their ability to have control over their environment. So,
Interesting twist.
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and just one more, thanks, Anto, for letting myself and Mark talk about this. I mean, Haystack Connect, we had the first series of events last week. All feedback has been really positive with great presentations there. 3 more sessions for this year's virtual event. We've gone to a format of 90 minutes, 11 a.m. Eastern to 12:30. People found that much more digestible. And so we've got a solid program, September 28th, October 12th, November 9th. All the sessions are posted. There's no cost. You do need to register to get on the mailing list and to get the links. But we had a really successful session last week, helmed by the new triumvirate and Mark, so of co-executive leaders there.
Great, thank you. So this is my slide, as it were. I was just sort of looking around, knowing that we're going to be talking about APIs, and I came across a couple of interesting articles that I thought I'd put here so that people can follow the links. And it's really to do with the cyber side of APIs, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but you know, APIs are packets that fly around across the internet, generally speaking. So you know, it is not immune to cyber issues. So we need to sort of keep that in mind. Just sort of brought that up. And any other thoughts or items anybody want to bring up before we continue? Hearing none. So let's talk about the great convergence. Let's talk about APIs. We had really interesting conversation in our private planning call last week about this, and this is kind of the motivation for doing this. And I'm going to stop the share because I don't have any other slides or anything. I'm going to pick on you, Anno, because you were most vocal last Wednesday about this subject. Do you want to kick this thing off? You want to kick this conversation off?
Absolutely. So I had this take, and this is just from some recent experience as well. So if you just sort of step back for a moment and talk about, you know, getting data from building systems, you know, we've all heavily been focused on the BMS systems, you know, the Honeywell Johnson Siemens Schneider systems, which are, you know, in various states and standards and vintages and stuff. And we've always talked about the challenges that relate to that, and that's all fine. The other thing that we've always talked about too is the emergence of a lot of IoT companies who are coming into the marketplace and solving particular vertical building solutions, vertical building business problems for building owners and being successful as that. One of my observations is that the IoT guys, and most of us have had this experience, it's not that they don't care about standards per se, you know, it's not that they don't care about things like Haystack or Brick or things. Most often than not, they just haven't been exposed to it. They haven't had the need for it. They don't understand the requirement. And more importantly, you know, when they build their solutions, 2 things are clear to me. One is they are very conversant about the need for APIs. I've yet to come across an IoT company or somebody that I'm dealing with and go, hey, we'd like to interface into your system. You know, do you have an API? And they say, no, that's never the case, right? Everybody says, absolutely, I have an API. And then the next thing that happens is with today's software development tools that these guys build their platforms in the cloud, there are so many great tools that to put an API on your platform today, if you're using any of the cloud tools or even if it's third-party tools, an API is almost out of the box for you, right? I mean, the software tools now, I'm creating my application, I can create an API, it'll automatically document it, it'll give me a wiki page for it, it'll give me a sandbox for it, and all this stuff is automatically generated for you today as a software guy, right? You don't have to put a lot of effort and work into it. Versus in the past, you know, you kind of built your platform and then you thought, oh, I have to do an API in the process of doing that. So it's pretty automatic. So my thesis was that as we deal with more and more of these guys outside of the existing BMS guys systems, There's just a plethora of these APIs. And when I talk to my software engineers about doing interfaces to these things, I'll give you a case in point. We literally had a call last Friday with a company, large company that does all IoT stuff, had my software guys on board. They gave us the API link. While we're on the call, my CTO went, yep, see it, got it. Hang on, what about this? What about that? Got it. Did you pass our cyber test? Yep, we did. Okay, my CTO goes, we're good to go. I know I don't need anything else, right? Sure, he still has to translate the metadata and do some translation stuff, but from his perspective, it's not a big lift anymore, which is a different question than like if I had to interface to a 20-year-old Honeywell system that's in the building. Sure, that's a whole different lift. But when I'm dealing with all these other systems that are coming in on board these days, the tools that these guys have got, the simplicity, and then that sort of started begging the question, well, do we need standards as a result if APIs are that easy? If my technical guys go, well, to create an API is an easy exercise, it comes with a documentation, and the other end, the guy goes, I look at it, I see it, I could do the sandbox, I've got the interface, I'm good to go. Is the care for things like Haystack and Brick relevant anymore because these guys, the technical guys are going, well, we've sorted it out, it's no big deal.
I think one of the key things with Haystack is it provides an open standard API that not only allows you to get the data, but it gives you the data format that you need, the metadata as well. So I would say from the Haystack point of view, a belief in an API as a very important integration method for data has been, there since the earliest days, right?
And I agree with you, John. I'm a full Haystack believer. Our platform is still 100% Haystack compliant. And I would tell you that even like these guys that we talked to on Friday, when I asked them about Haystack, being good engineers on the call, the first thing they all did was Google it, right there on the call, and they went, "Oh yeah, this looks like it should. This is a good idea." I go, "Well, yeah, we don't do it this way, but we could." And I go, "Well, would you?" And he goes, "Well, could you just use our API as it is?" I go, "Well, yeah, but and that's kind of the point I'm at, right? Is
oh yeah, I agree.
The
I think
engineers are going like.
I think gets the whole difference between integration and interoperability. If they publish an open API, you can integrate if you have a software engineer, right? And the software engineer may have the reaction your guys did in 5 minutes. He knows, oh, I get it. I understand. I can integrate with it as long as somebody's going to pay the freight of the 1 hour to 1,000 hours it takes, right? Depending on the complexity. There's some really ugly ones out there too, right?
Oh yeah.
But that's not, that doesn't make it interoperable, right? It makes it integratable, right? And I think that's one of the things we're seeing is there's so many of them that it's easier than writing a wire protocol driver, but it does require software talent to do it, right?
And I think what you said, John, the whole idea that we're not ignoring integration, but we're now talking about interoperability is one of the major differences between a smart building and a smarter building is the whole interoperability, not only of the equipment, the systems, but also of the data. So
to me, the question is one of scale. I think that it's very possible to use these tools and APIs to do integration of smaller systems. But when you get to very, very large scale, it gets to be very expensive to aggregate this data. And I think that's the place where Haystack and other metadata standards shine.
Yeah, I'll jump on with Jim. When you're trying to do things at a portfolio scale and you're looking for, all air handlers, all discharge air temperature sensors, all anything, irrespective of the site that it's connected to, that's where Haystack is going to shine every time. So that's why it exists. You really want to.
Let me just challenge that a little bit further, and I agree with you guys 100%. Yep. But the challenge I got with the IoT guy, he's just doing one very specific thing. Let's make it easy. Let's say it's a water flow monitoring in all the faucets or whatever, toilets or whatever. That's all he does. He doesn't care about air handling units and VAV boxes or, you know, or the lighting guy. He doesn't, he's got a very narrow focus on what it is he's doing. And from his perspective, when I talk to him about Haystack, I go, look at all these, you know, objects that we've got. He goes, yeah, okay, but I've just got lights. And my view is this narrow, right? So I get what you're asking for, but for me to do a whole lift just to do this one little bit, slice of the pie.
The problem is from his perspective, that's true, but he's a vendor. He's not the
Right.
consumer of that information, where the consumer of the information now has 20 of these unscalable things to maintain.
Mhm.
And when the software engineer that did that mapping is gone, I'm now in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Whereas if I have standards and sustainability, I can sustain the control system over many generations of people and time.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the bugaboo. That's why the large companies have been successful holding on to large customers for a long period of time.
And in the long run, is this going to be a limited business model for them? I think it's going to end up catching up to them, and they're going to go, well, you just show me your stuff. I don't want just your stuff. I want what
Yeah.
Jim Lee just said. And I think their business model will be extremely limited, and whether or not many of them survive or not, well, who knows?
Yeah, I want to pick up on Jim's comment about maintenance of API integration.
Yeah.
Because, you know, that can be a real issue depending on the culture of the software department at the vendor, right? Public APIs aren't supposed to change, right? You may have some private stuff hidden that you're experimenting with or you don't public, but people are supposed to be able to rely on that. But our experience is that the cultural, disciplines of some of these special startup, especially startup companies who are making products, might not have that same view, and, you know, worked yesterday doesn't work today. And then you need, like you said, Jim, you need, you know, who's the guy who did the original API integration, and, you know, but I think the biggest thing, I think it's a reality that we can hope starts to, coalesce around some standards, so there's less of this diversity out there. But I would agree with Arno. This is just what's popping up everywhere, because that's the easy answer for the new startup. How are you going to get your product adopted? It's going to have an open API. Anybody who has a software engineer will be able to integrate with it, right? I think this is what a lot of the clients and customers complain about. What's with this bizarre complexity of this industry? And, you know, in an odd way, the BAS industry has adapted to a small number of standards, and we still get abuse because it's not easy enough. And I think we're getting some of the mud thrown on us, all these IoT guys coming up, and they're throwing out 50 a year. And it's like, well, we standardized on, Picket BACnet or whatever, but the building owner doesn't see that. They see every single device or system has a different API, and they need software engineers or an expensive system integrator to solve it. I'd say we're seeing more of this, not less.
Well, and just
one might say our industry is ahead in its thinking.
Whoa.
Oh, careful, Jim. Let's not go crazy.
Sorry.
That's a good one. I like it.
But just to echo that, I mean, that is part of our challenge too. It's a blessing and a curse in that, the IT, I see on the IT side of the house, APIs are just all over the place, right? I mean, in fact, that's why companies like Dell, Boomi, and what was the other one? The one that Salesforce bought. Anyway.
That one.
Yeah, MuleSoft, MuleSoft and Dell Boomi. That's why those companies came into existence, because, and I knew one of the guys at MuleSoft, and he told me that the number of APIs, for example, in the finance industry as it relates to banking specifically, was orders of magnitude more than what we deal with, you know, and he was talking, you know, there's just so many of them, and they went through the same phase, and that they started with, you know, just, oh, it's just APIs, we'll just all connected together, and then companies like MuleSoft and Boomi came around because they said, well, we'll do it for you, you know, because it actually is, you know, you sure, could you roll it your own? Yeah, but could you maintain it? Probably not, you know, because stuff changes, like John says. So it's kind of interesting to see their space go through this whole.
But all those companies you mentioned have software engineering departments, right? You're
Yeah.
not
Oh,
running
yeah,
a
huge.
financial organization without a huge team. And what we've seen, I think we've talked about on other calls, is we're losing or not able to attract that level of talent in our industry, right?
Yeah. That's
And
true.
so that makes open APIs, you know, in an odd way, less a solution than more. If there were all kinds of software engineers coming into our industry, then a building, yeah, I got Bill can do that for me, you know. Right.
I'm going to have a real interesting benchmark on that on Wednesday, John. I have I'm doing some work who I'm with at the moment. I'm looking at interns from UT and Texas A&M. So I'm going to be really, and you know, I'm going to be one of course, many companies. So I'm going to be fascinated to see how many people how many of these kids put their hand up to go, yes, I want to come and learn about APIs for thermostats.
Let me
So
ask you
what-
guys a question. Is the problem we have is the interoperability, like what we're talking about, is not being demanded. It's not being asked for by the people who value it the most, which would be the owners, right? Otherwise, vendors would respond to that. True, false?
I think there's at least one faction of customers out there that just expect it, and they're like, WTF with you guys, right? You know, they don't, because they are exposed to it through their financial side or whatever and standards, and there's maybe uninformed expectation that there should be easier ways of getting interoperability. But I would agree with you, if more of the people who buy systems and these products demanded it, then, you know, the problem would be dramatically reduced. But I think lack of awareness or expectation is a big problem.
Well, once again,
You
the
know,
people that were responsible for these decisions, which was the consulting community, have abdicated their responsibility. And, you know, there's a vacuum. That's why the Div 2525 stuff and the Smarter Stack are so important. That, you know, I think that transitionally, the rate of creation of these IoT companies is such that that they haven't even faced the sustainability problems. That's the value proposition for the metadata way of doing things.
Yeah, that IoT companies are turn and burn, right? They're here and they're
Yeah.
sold in 2 years or less than 5 years, and they don't have any long-term investment in making sure that things are interoperable years from now. So, and the other
So-
question, let me bring out one other problem that I think I see, which is there are forces within our industry that don't necessarily want to make all of this easy, because that's how they make their money, right? Integration is, I mean, there are system integrators, right? If things just plug and play too easily, does that threaten that? Or what about, you know, the thing that, and I mentioned this in our call the other day, in the lawn community, a lot of even the sponsor members of Lawnmark fought actively in the end, especially against the concept of interoperability, and what that leads to, which is interchangeability, right? Two slightly different concepts, but kissing cousins, let's say.
Yeah.
So how do we get past that? How do we get owners to ask and understand enough to ask for it, and B, to actually get some kind of an agreement somewhere in the industry that we can move this
But
forward?
what are they going to actually ask for? They're
Well,
not gonna ask for APIs, obviously.
No, that's the problem. What they ask for is a solution. They don't ask for interoperability, which is sort of the foundational piece to the solution they envision. And they don't understand enough to even specify what interoperability really means, I think. At least that's been
Well, and that,
my experience.
that, if you have a look at Matt White's comment on the chat, by the way, he's kind of in the same context, Tracy. People don't know that they're oftentimes, if they're asking for it, they're doing it out of context and not knowing what value it is that, that it's going to create at the end of the day too. And I've seen this as well, right? There's the other side of the camp where they go, oh yeah, because there's APIs, we should do it. And I've had that discussion too over the last few weeks too about, oh, we should go talk to these guys because there's an API. I get what you're saying, but what value would they produce as a result of getting the API and doing the work? What's the value going to create? And they stumble. I go, well, because I can go get it. I go, okay, and what are you going to do with it? Give me the use case of what is it going to do, and they don't, and it just, and I guess this comes back to my whole point about the APIs being so damn easy that, the technical folk goes, yes, it can be done. This is great. Oh, we should then therefore go do it. I go, no, whoa, stop. No, it doesn't mean we should do it just cause. We should now think about what is it we're going to get from them and what are we going to do with it and what's the purpose and where's the value and what's the return. And they seem to struggle there.
Yeah, so Anno, if you look at the protocol evolution, right? So in the 90s, we had every manufacturer with a proprietary protocol. And that drove LAN and then subsequently back. And Modbus, of course, was around as well. And there's Dolly and a few others. But really, the list narrowed significantly. And today, BACnet is the predominant one. And the rest are relatively minor. With APIs now proliferating the way proprietary protocols did, because that's what they essentially are, they're all proprietary. Do we need a separate industry initiative? You just described what MuleSoft is trying to do for the IT industry. Does our industry need to take a look at how APIs are being engineered and put a framework or boundaries around the recommended methodologies for creating APIs that will allow us to have some controls over it, so it doesn't just become a mess to navigate.
But Steve, why
component?
Why is that limited to our industry? And that's going to be the same across anybody that wants to talk between systems.
Well, I'm not suggesting that it is limited to our industry. I'm just saying our industry got together and put a lot of effort into standardizing on a handful of protocols, and it's been advantageous. Would everybody agree it's been advantageous? Maybe I'm making the wrong conclusion, but I think it has been.
I think it has. I would propose a radical idea, Steve. I would basically say, why don't we tell these IoT people to create a BACnet interface, a BACnet API?
Yeah,
but I know the answer to that.
I do too.
Everyone else.
But I know the answer to that, Jim. They're going to go, what's BACnet? And then they're going to go, okay, where's the book? And then they're going to go, dude, I've got to buy this whole library thing. If I just write a cloud thing in Amazon, I get a whole suite of tools to do it. And then I go, well, you need to go talk to Jim Lee at Symetrics because he's got all the tools. He goes, okay, that's one. Who else has got the tools that I can get a competitive price? Well, it's just Jim.
No, there are
okay.
Others, but but the key point is that even if whether they bought it from me or not, what a concept of actually adhering to the standards so that their product could integrate and sell with the ecosystem that's already there. I mean, from a product management standpoint, why is that so radical? Why haven't you guys, if I crack open the internet and test this, and test my ideas before I why can't
Until a
my
paying
thesis is-
customer asks for
Yeah.
that, though, that's the problem. IoT guys are so nichely focused, if that's a word, that they don't care about interoperability. They're solving a very specific problem for people, and that's what
Right.
they're getting paid for. If a paying customer came along and asked these guys to do it, I'm sure they would, right? That's
Well, and then
part of the
and
challenge.
my big part of the thesis is I can just someone asks me for an API, I can whack out an API in half a day, you know, and I'm done. And here it is, you know, type of deal. And what I'm trying to say is the technology today for a software development company to create a product with an API is literally trivial, right? And let's just not pick on BACnet for a moment. Let's go the other way, right? When we first started with LON, to get into doing a LON development with an API, you know this, Tracy, you had to buy what was it, a bloody $25,000 LON
Yeah,
maker.
in the early days, that was. the-
Yeah, right. That was
yeah.
the model, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
shoot, I can't afford that. I'm not getting into that, you know.
I'll tell you, even in the end, when it was a $3,500 device, people were hesitant to pay for a $3,500 device.
And there's one more dimension that I got to say, and again, not picking on anyone specific, but I know that if I've got a software developer and I go, okay, I've got a question about, I'll pick on LON, sorry, Tracy, and I've got a question about LON protocol on this particular object, the community that I go to ask for an answer for that is pretty small. If I go to the community of APIs, there's thousands of people who will answer your questions, right? I mean, the universe today of software people and all the communication tools that they've got today to be able to talk to someone and go, hey, I need a JSON object that does blah, 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 and acts like this and does this and has this cyber. He'll get 50 answers in minutes, you know? And it's just got so easy for them. And that's part of the challenge. In that, you know, we still make LON and BACnet hard and
Well,
Haystack. Sorry.
And a lot of these companies, the motivation is to create IP, intellectual property, right?
Yeah.
So why would they want to just do what everybody else is doing? Ours is better, ours is faster, different, less money, more capable, whatever, right? It's and I'm not saying that every API has that attribute to it, but that's the mentality. It's a not invented here mentality that I think throws mud in the middle of all of this too.
But their value is not in their API in theory, Tracy.
I totally
And that's
agree.
the point.
And in Jim's case, even though I'm not looking to make Symmetrics, you know, a bigger, badder ass company out there, you know, we just went through however many years trying to get BACnet to be secure. So there could be a whole nother initiative to make BACnet a API version of BACnet for, you know, for all these cloud applications. That could be just an initiative that the ASHRAE and BTL and everybody gets behind, and we get some standardization that way. Why not?
Right.
So if that was the case, and I don't know if I'm so far out, who owns it?
Oh,
Who
hopefully.
owns the API? If all these people come
independent group.
together, who owns this API or whatever?
The last person that touched it.
No,
Most likely.
It wouldn't most likely be ASHRAE. If it's anything attached to BACnet, it'll be ASHRAE.
Yeah.
If it's done that way, if it's
Right.
Well, or go to what Anno was talking about earlier, just the IoT companies and all that. I mean, obviously there's value in APIs. We're a business value. We know that. All right. But again, ultimately, somebody's going to ask the question, who owns it?
But that's the
It's a
point.
standard.
Nobody owns.
We're
it.
talking
It's
about a
nobody
standard.
owns
Okay,
it.
Nobody owns it. Yeah.
again, I'm trying to understand.
Everybody owns their implementation of it, Mark, but if you do it per standard, then you've got something that can be interoperable across all the different vendors.
All right, and then how would, and pardon my naivete in this, if you find a vulnerability in it, who's responsible for fixing that vulnerability?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Martha, we haven't really touched on a lot yet is the cyber side of the equation, right? And I do believe that the wire protocols like BACnet and LON have done a much better job. I think they've done a much better job of addressing the cyber side of it because we recognize it. Now, having said that, again, the feedback I get from the software guys in the cloud, it goes, yeah, you know, I throw XYZ from Azure on top of that and I've solved my cyber problem, you know?
Yeah, but I also think the question is, who does the customer think owns it and who actually does own it? Could be two different things. So from the customer perspective, I think if you're the person that's using the API to deliver a solution, you're probably going to own that in the customer's eye. But the question is, if you're using an API from a third party and they change something on API, now you have to go back and redo what you've done, and you haven't, and that's on you. Do you charge the customer for that? Do you build that into your pricing? If there is a vulnerability and it comes through, who's responsible for that? Are you supposed to be monitoring that API? So there's all different ways that this can go, you know? And
you did right. I think John talked about it earlier with maintenance. Maintenance of APIs is not something yet really discussed and talked through. And, you know, and people tend to dismiss that because they go, well, you know, I'll deal with maintenance when they change it. And we all know they're all going to change it the next day, right?
Or if you're a vendor, that's more paying work for me later.
Yeah.
Right. The root cause of our problem, though, is the lack of demand from the people who could benefit the most. As soon as that happens, people will start jumping on board, and it needs to come from somebody with enough wherewithal, market share, financial resources, whatever it might be, to really start to drive this. And once people see the results of that, that's how de facto standards get started, right? Well, geez, it worked so well over there. If those guys are doing it, well, you know, nobody ever got fired for doing what those guys did. That kind of a thing, right? Half the IT standards around computers and the PC weren't created in an industry group. They were from a manufacturer that let it out into the wild, and people said, oh yeah, that works. And now it's free to me, so I'll start using it. And then standards groups come and form behind it sometime. Right? So that's the part that I think we're missing.
So Matt White just posted something on chat. Really, I think what he's asking is if a vendor, he's using the example of MAP, but I think this could work. This question could be applied to any vendor. If a vendor makes their API public, put it on GitHub so anybody can use it on both ends, as a serving and as a client, why can't that be open? Why can't that then be a standard?
What's the definition?
It's open. It's not a standard. It's
It's just
developed purely by them without input from a wider community. But it's open, and we can, you know, anybody can integrate to it, right?
So technically, it could be a de facto standard if there was enough support for that, right?
Sure.
Right, but that was Tracy's point, right? Standards happen when enough people are using something that's common, right? And then someone sits down and creates a standard around it. Rarely do we create a standard and then say everybody use it, you know.
So Anto, are you suggesting that if a bunch of companies started posting their APIs on GitHub and the community started looking at what's out there and said, man, I really like this guy's API, and they started using it instead of, you know, doing their own version, just because of the feature set and how it was being done, that would drive critical mass, and then potentially other people would start doing the same thing?
Yes, but that would only work in comparison to other APIs that do the same thing.
Right.
Because APIs, there are millions of APIs. They don't all do the same thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
There's a dozen of APIs that do exactly the same thing. You know, one could see that happening. Gets used more than others, it becomes a de facto standard. I mean, Haystack is effectively that, I would imagine. No, it's a bit more standardized, I guess.
so if you guys were writing a spec for a customer, would you spec API? It's very general, I know, but would you?
Did you spec a
Spec-
single one or spec that they could be used for integrating equipment? What's the?
Either.
I
Would you
think
or
they
would you
have
not?
to, I don't think there's any way around.
Okay.
Sophisticated systems are going to have to integrate some products, APIs, sensors, IoT devices, IAQ devices, on and on and on. Data feeds for energy cost structures, all of that.
So you
It's
would
there.
rather, so you would spec it, would you spec it as utilize the API? Would you prefer to spec it as it is that data comes through a BMS if one exists at that site?
Yeah, a lot of it's not BMS data, right? That it's
Yeah.
not sensor data, right? Utility rates aren't sensor data, right? You can't stuff them into a controller, right?
What I've seen on that front, Gina, is even when people are attempting to ask and demand the right thing, it doesn't get seen through in the right way, and specmanship starts coming in. So if an owner asks, in their spec, thou shall make all your data readily available. Well, I have an API. It's readily available, right? Or
Does that count?
you have to get
Yeah.
very specific about what that means. And I think that's where owners just don't understand to what degree they have to actually specify in order to get truly interoperable data from everybody.
And I think the challenge I'm having, guys, is that, okay, go back 5 years, when there was a handful of IoT companies, it was a bit of a, so what, right? Because, we were dealing with all the big systems, the BACnet, the Bonds, the Modbuses, et cetera, et cetera. Today, what I'm sensing is there are just the number of IoT companies that are hitting up building owners and property managers is an orders of magnitude more than the quote unquote, handful of protocols that we deal with. And so when you look at it from the building owner's perspective, he goes, okay, hang on, you're telling me about, okay, I see Honeywell Johnson's BACnet law, I'm sure I get that. But now I've also got these 20 other systems in my building that just turned up over the last 3 years. They've all got their own APIs. So how are we going to go deal with that? And my point is, I think the balance, the weight has changed the equation. When it was just a handful before, yeah, it was a bit of a so what. But now it's got to the attention of the guy. They talk about APIs. Can you do their API? Yeah.
So I know you talk about API as being something that is natural to the IoT companies, which is, we all understand. Is there then sort of this conflict between API companies versus, I think we're all sort of not saying it, but we're all sort of assuming that traditional BAS companies are not API first and probably would resist API. Right. So is that the problem?
That's what I'm saying. Yes, that's what. And the reason that the IoTs have done it, for two reasons. It's so, with the tools today, it's so damn easy to create one. Documented, sandbox, the whole kit and caboodle, costs you nothing to do.
But you're almost saying that that's a bad thing. I mean, it's a good thing.
I'm not saying it's. I don't know what it is. I guess I'm saying I don't know what it is. I'm trying to work it out. I guess it's something we have to deal with.
It's leading to this proliferation that requires now software engineering systems integration on a job when somebody's, I just want to get the IAQ data. You mean I have to have a software engineer involved in that? Yes, you do.
Okay, but let me challenge that a little bit, John. So if you didn't have it as a software engineer, then my other answer is I got to put a Jace in. And now I need a guy who's trained on Tritium Niagara and knows how to do configuration.
My point was if they were rallying around a standard API, then there would not be as much custom work required. Not that you want to do it with.
True. Okay.
hardware.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
That was the only.
So
it's a reality. It's just real. Go ahead.
I'm talking about these damn IoT companies.
Brian, what do you say?
So I think our industry, because of the proliferation of APIs and IoT and the inertia that's built there, I don't see that stopping. And the other challenge is the variability in APIs and ultimately the support. If you go into the financial world where you guys started with MuleSoft and its acquisition, and you look at Celigo and some of the others, they were built because this problem has already been solved in that
Right.
industry. We haven't taken that initiative yet. That's where products like Mapped and our product IoT Jetstream and OnboardData.io, those are all starting to emerge. They're still early in their product development, and I would say, all of us have several buildings that are running through our stuff, but it's yet to become a standard. And so, where we talk about the management of APIs, if a few companies like MuleSoft and Celigo, or in our case, IoT Jetstream and Mapped, are managing those APIs and then making the API for the building come out, then it becomes a lot more feasible for application developers to build application against one of those APIs rather than trying to incorporate all of them, right? And so
Yeah.
I think APIs are messy. I said API is a 4-letter word earlier in the chat, and I believe that because many companies follow what John said earlier, where they develop an API out of a requirement from the market. And then if lesser companies are, I think Anno might have said it, API first, where they develop their API ahead of developing their actual product or integration or whatever, because they understand the goal is to make this data available in a consistent way. And so that's where they start. And that's, I think, the biggest difference between quality APIs and APIs that have a hard time being maintained. And a lot of times this documentation that's automatically generated is absolutely just not supported because they never did the work on the back end to actually make those things work. And so as a developer, you end up writing against these APIs only to find out that it doesn't work because they haven't used that API for 6 months or sometimes 2 to 3 years. They just made it so they could tell people they had an API. So
Correct.
It's a little bit off my soapbox, but I think when we have products that are more pervasive, like MuleSoft, what had become and Celigo has become, I think it'll make this problem a whole lot easier to deal with.
And I agree with you 100%, Brian, because MuleSoft, and I know the guy who started it, he started it because it, like you said, the problem existed in the banking industry. They had a banking clients who were trying to get different applications that were built internally, interestingly enough. They weren't even external apps, they were internal apps. So the bank couldn't even get the internal apps to talk to each other, and he kind of started it on that premise. So he filled a gap that just arose, right?
That's why we built Jetstream, because we were finding that we're not the only app developer that was trying to connect all these things. And so we had to make that easier. If we're trying to make onboarding of data easier and access to data easier for everybody, then there's got to be products in the middle that do that. And it's got to be able to integrate. So BACNet's a great API, but you have to be able to integrate it. Same thing with Haystack and those things, and share them with IoT. To expect anybody in an industry is just going to fall in line and everybody do something the same way on product. I mean, all of us have been around long enough to know that's fool's gold.
Just to expand on your point about API first, and the IoT guys, they use APIs by nature. So one of the things I know too is that their software development model is also different. They're typically, their front ends and their consumption of their data uses the same APIs, and they actually, the reason they build the APIs is because they're building user experiences that consumes those APIs, which is why they're maintained and kept up to date, and that's why they've become relatively pervasive. Versus, like you said, the earlier companies, it was a bolt-on afterthought.
Yeah, and it's a huge piece. I have yet to be able to specify testing that proves that you're API first, because now that marketing or that messaging is starting to get out to people, everybody now is saying they're API first, even if they're not.
Yeah,
there's a way.
I have a test for you.
Yeah,
I have a test for you, Brian. If you want to use it, we used this last week. Especially if it's an IoT company, if it's an IoT company who also produces some, what we call, so we kind of class it as raw data versus processed data. If they're just doing raw data, which is just passing through, right, they typically have the API. Processed data means they've done something with it. They've written some algorithm or some view. Yeah. And I asked them, can I get access to the processed data, not the raw data? And if they say no, then that typically means you're not really API first. You're still doing something funky at the back.
Yeah, no, we agree. The amount of vendors that will refuse to send you the raw data or the process data. It's one or the other, and it's
Yeah.
what they think is more valuable, or they can't. They simply
Yeah.
they didn't create an API first. They've created a bunch of custom code that's under the hood that's not easy to expose via API. And I would say the ones who have been around longer, I think, are more in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the ones who are newer have definitely gone the API first. But I still think that products like Sligo are going to end up needing to exist so that we're not
Yeah.
trying to manage the same API connection to thousands of different technologies. It's to, a few of them, and then the thousands are connected to a few.
Right.
It's an API aggregator in a lot of ways that Sligo and all those guys do.
And again, my thesis is based on the fact that I think the tide has turned with the volumes of IoT companies being put forth internal customers, that now is generating those questions and those discussions with the customers themselves. They're the ones who go like, well, the guy said he had an API. The guy said he's got an API. He's got an API. Like, whereas before we would be more in the driver's position of, well, is it BACnet or is it LON or is it Modbus? And they would go, oh, I don't know. He said it was an API. Go make it work.
Steve, you say something?
No, it's what it's saying is, if you will, from a protocol standpoint, we've lost the battle. So the APIs have merged now, and they're becoming the de facto way in which dissimilar systems are being asked to communicate with each other.
Steve,
So fine.
I would say we haven't lost, because like I think Jim Lee brought it up, you brought it up, BACnet is pervasive around device and building communication, but
Right.
we're integrating applications that are not building centric. I mean, they're building
Right.
centric.
That's right. That's the key.
So we're integrating, products like NetSuite and Salesforce and work order management tools like Corrigo. So it's not, you can't just say, well, all of those guys now got to support BACnet. It's just not feasible. So I think
Right.
that because of the complexity and the variability of all of these different systems, I think they can coexist without saying we won or lost.
Yeah.
So Ken, you've been very quiet observing all of this. Would you like to opine on your thoughts listening to this conversation as we start to wrap up?
I think it's a bit out of my league. I kind of get the sense of what's going on, but it looks pretty complex. And but that was a great discussion. I learned lots. I think everybody else did as well. So thanks, guys. That was great. And as we mentioned before, we were organizing this session. We had a great discussion on Wednesday as well, and it went very much the same way. As it's not this way or that way. It's pretty soft, and we're definitely going to have them in our future. How we manage them, we need to figure that out.
Yeah. So if you recall, the question that we posed at the beginning of this show is API the standard for everything? And I think we can all agree that it's not the standard. It probably is a standard, a way of doing things. Is that a good way of thinking about it?
I call them YAPs, yet another protocol.
I was actually thinking earlier that back in the 80s and 90s, back then, long time ago, people used to say, yeah, we have my system has a standard RS-232 port on it, right? And so you plug it in, and obviously it doesn't work because the RS-232 is just a standard of a plug. It doesn't mean anything about the data and the format. So to me, API standard, if you call an API standard, is similar to an RS-232. It means something, but it doesn't mean everything.
I agree, and I think my point was, as common as the term RS-232 was bandied about, even my wife would say RS-232 without knowing what it meant. Our problem right now is they say APIs, but our customers say, oh, they've got APIs without really understanding what does that mean, and that's the challenge that we've got.
That's the key right there, that there's different definitions or perceptions of what an API actually is.
And they just bandy the term around, right?
Right.
I think the theme
Cool.
of our September issue or September month is the convergence, and I think that's the problem. I think Brian pointed that out, is we're now interfacing things we never even imagined.
Right.
And the way we need to do that is rapidly is probably APIs, and the people, they know, they speak API. So I think it's becoming an evolving standard, or an evolving way of doing it anyway.
Great.
Guys, I'm not going to argue that with Brian at all on applications like Salesforce and Corrigo, you know, in terms of why that wouldn't make any sense to, in my mind, to put those into the BACnet bucket. But I think there is a case to be made for IoT devices coming into the BACnet world in some fashion. So it's not one or the other, but I do think there's, you know, going back, I can get on Jim's, you know, train here. I think make a lot of sense to push BACnet in that regard in the future.
So
Okay,
just,
so
I
with
know
that,
we're way out
we-
of time. Sorry, just
Go
last
ahead.
point. Part of the challenge I got, Steve, is every time I mention standards, if I find one of these guys and I mention something like BACnet or LON or a Haystack, whatever, they go, "Oh, that exists." I go like, "Come on."
That's fine, but that, you know, that's why we're here. I don't.
I
That's
get
why
it.
we're talking
I get it.
about it, right? That's why we're trying to show
Alright.
some leadership here. Is can we direct some of these up and coming players to start looking at the work that's already been done over 25 years
Right.
and take advantage of it, instead of saying, just throwing our hands up and say, well, the horse left the
Yeah.
barn. You know, the horse has to come back to eat. So let's have him come back and we'll feed him. And we'll give him the BACnet grain, right?
I think that's one of the big problems is speed. If you take a look at BACnet, take a look at Haystack, I mean, look at how many years they all were in the development. And the problem is we need today's solutions, and the API is quick, it's dirty, and it works.
And
That's the problem.
it's not industry specific, like anything
Yeah.
that's come out of ASHRAE is.
Cool. All right, let's bring this to a wrap. It's been a fascinating discussion, and thank you to Brian, who's left. And we'll get the video up tomorrow, and we'll see you back next week. And in the meantime, have a great week. Bye all.
All right.
See ya.
Yeah.
Bye.